Gilberto Deon Correa Jr. Welcome to the DCQ podcast special sits. I'm really happy to have you on. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you.
Excellent. So I understand that today you're live from Brazil, from Porto Alegre, right?
That's right. For those who
Excellent.
don't know Porto Alegre is the capital of Rio Grande do Sul in the south of Brazil, close to Uruguay and Argentina.
Excellent. So this is the first time that the DCQ podcast ventures into South America. And in the world of special sits, as I know it, Brazil as a country and South America as a region is definitely getting a more prominent place on the map. But for those listeners that are not so familiar with Brazil as a country and South America as a region, maybe we can start by you giving us a sense of what kind of country Brazil is and how it is positioned in South America.
Well, we used to say here in Brazil that Brazil is made of several different countries because you see lots of difference between regions. The accent that we use when we speak Portuguese, we make jokes about ourselves, but it's a very nice people that live here. It's a huge country. It's the biggest country in South America. And we have a strong agricultural business. We also have business in several other fields, but we are very well known for that. And for you know, I used to say that for those who never came to Brazil, you should, because it's definitely a very good place to visit, and lots of things to see, lots of different things to see as well, and so that's it.
Excellent. So yeah, I know there's a standing invitation to come over, and I've been, close to coming over a couple of times on situations, but it sort of never has materialized. Well, maybe we can start, your journey by looking into how did you actually, decide to become a lawyer? When did that happen, and how did you sort of specialize ultimately in the field of special situations?
Well, I'm thinking here, where should I start? Because first thing I remember when someone asked me about why you became a lawyer was something that
Yeah,
happened to me when I was about 15. My father was also a lawyer. He was also a prosecutor. Later on, he became a judge of the appellate court. And I was about 15, I think. He had an office at home, and I went to his office. At the time, all the files were, physical files. We didn't have electronic things at that time. And I took one of those files and started to look at it, and did it for less than 1 minute, I think. And I said, it's amazing the way you write. It's difficult. It seems that you write from the end to the beginning. I will never be a lawyer. and, and
famous
and
words. That
here I
was
am. And when you are a kid, you think about being from a firefighter to a president, and we think about lots of things. And in Brazil, differently from other places, you need to go through an exam to be accepted to the university. And we need to apply for this exam at a time for each one of the universities. And I did it for several things. I applied for the engineering school of our Air Force. I applied to go to the Navy to be an officer. And I applied to join the Federal University here to take law. And there was also another university at our town at the time, and I couldn't decide whether I would apply for being an electrical engineer or a doctor. And I did, and then I applied to become an engineer. So I passed all the exams, and at the end I decided to join law. and I'm happy I have done it because it definitely is a wonderful profession. I'm in the right place.
And
And
is it something that since your dad was a lawyer, a judge, a prosecutor, was it something that you grew up with? And obviously, your experience as a 15-year-old was, let's run a mile from that. It's incomprehensible what you're writing. It's not what I want to do. But okay, you've been around it. What did you know about the law before you actually decided to,
well,
to do it?
my grandpa was also a lawyer. I have two kids
Okay.
that are lawyers, so it's in the
It
family.
runs in the family.
Yeah, but he never said to me, you should do this or that. And this is exactly what I try to do with my kids. We need to show them, and I think that's what he has done with me. All the alternatives you have, it's on you to choose. You need to be happy doing what you are going to do for your life. Otherwise, it's not going to be good. And of course, looking back to the past, we leave that thing. If you like to see what your father do, so it's difficult to say that there's no influence. But I've also seen many people that are sons of doctors, engineers, lawyers, and they simply go to a different path. So I don't know.
If I look at myself, I was pretty ignorant about the law, to be really honest. Went to law school because it was something that, gives you all options still. Then, I did well in my first year and I thought, actually, maybe I'm actually good at this. And then, for me, a movie that had a huge influence on me was, Tom Cruise's movie, The Firm. It came out, just when I was in law school. Obviously, reality is completely different from, what you see there. But yeah, it is a profession that, gives you options. I started in private practice immediately, but I understand that you actually didn't start in private practice immediately.
Well, let me answer the other question you made about how I end up in special seats. Then we come back to
Yes.
this one. And because this is also interested. I was about to graduate, and I remember talking to my father and saying to him, look, in which field of law do you think I should specialize? And he said, don't worry about that. Lives will give you one. And that's what happened.
Wow.
Because, well, but then let's go to these questions. Also, before graduating, I saw an advertisement of a career, and that was for trying to translate these for people that are not from Brazil, to be a lawyer for the IRS, to be a lawyer for the financial ministry. In other words, to work with tax
Yeah.
and related issues. And at the time, we could be the lawyer for the IRS and also have your own firm. That was what I was planning to do. But then I graduated, and one of my professors invited me to work in his law firm. And 2 years later, I took the exam to also work for the financial ministry. And then I stayed there for 14 years. And we could, at the time, uh, work as a lawyer and for the ministry, but we could never be involved in any matter that was related to the federal government. But then they changed that rule, and at a certain time, I was invited to leave my firm. And after I came back, well, that's also a long story because when I came back from the US, I took an LLM there, and I met a friend. And the friend said to me, look, I think I got a piece of New York. I brought a piece of New York to Porto Alegre. He was referring to working to a big firm, and that was interesting. And then he invited me to join that firm, which I did. And after a while, I resigned from the work I had for the federal government, and since then, I've been working as a lawyer. But what happened that put me in the distress
Special situations space.
situations?
Yeah.
Yes. When I went to work to this law firm from my professor, there was a liquidation of two very well-known financial institutions group here in the south of Brazil. There were, and I started being involved with these, with different claims related to those financial institutions and also claims related to other companies that were connected. From there, working in other bankruptcy cases. And then I went to take my master. And because I was involved with that, I decided to write my paper on the extension of the bankruptcy to other entities. Then I studied that. And after I took the master degree, I went to study in the US. And there we had classes with Lawrence Keane, who was a wonderful professor. I also took advanced issues in bankruptcy, wrote a paper there about substantive consolidation, which ended up being the first place on that matter published in Brazil. And before that, I applied to become a professor at one university. After I was accepted, they said to me, look, you're going to teach bankruptcy. So everything together, when I came back from the US, I was here about 1 year, I think. I went down my office and I met my father was there talking to someone I didn't know. And this guy came to be the reporting representative, the one that was responsible for a new bankruptcy bill. And we had a very quick conversation, and I said to him, look, we can stay where we are, or we can move decades if we change this project, because what we have there is exactly what we have. And in the past in Brazil, we used to have what we call concordata, which was a favor granted to those companies that were not able to pay their debts. We need something else. We need something that we can adapt to different kinds of business. We need something that we need where we can show this is something that we can do and not something that you are going to grant to someone to have some time to pay, do nothing, at the end you are going to end up in the same place with more debts. And then like a week or two later, he called me and said, look, I like the conversation we had. And we had a group that is helping me in, drafting this law. Would you like to join us? It's yes, why not? And that's why and how I ended up there. And then from there on, when I realized I was, working a lot with distressed assets. But one thing that is important, I don't do only distressed assets. All my life, I've been doing distressed assets and M&As, distressed assets and investments. And this, yes, you are not involved in so many cases as you could because you do other things, but gives you a broader perspective about law, helps a lot sometimes to build some alternatives, helps you a lot to negotiate, to talk to people, you understand different businesses, and I guess I might, I think I answer your question. It's a long story that
Absolutely.
I
I mean,
try to, sum up.
there's a lot in it. I actually didn't appreciate when you and I met in 1994, 1995, when we were at NYU, that you actually did your paper on substantive consolidation. I wrote something on that much later, and obviously I didn't appreciate that you were in that field of expertise. I only became, I started in 1995 and then sort of, went into the specialization there. And we obviously, met along the way at conferences where, both you and I focused on insolvency. So that's actually very interesting. So you started with the IRS as, a big client or somebody you worked for, but alongside you could also do a private practice, and that was the gateway into insolvency and seeing various liquidations. Substantive consolidation actually is something where Brazil is, quite famous for, because I think, it is applied most in Brazil. Can you maybe say something about that?
Yeah, but I think there is, even here we have seen over the years, and now it's much better, but there was a misunderstanding about what substantive consolidation is, and the concepts were mixed with disregard of the legal entity, liability, and substantive consolidations, and the differences between substantive consolidation and procedural consolidation. And so if I go back, when I wrote my paper about the extension of the bankruptcy, and just a clarification, in Brazil, we still use bankruptcy for for liquidation. So when I mention here bankruptcy, I'm referring to a liquidation instead of referring to Chapter 11 or judicial recovery, as we call in Brazil. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the concepts, because I've seen several decisions in the past where the court said, in different fields, because we have different understandings and laws applying to to this matter, if you are in the labor court, if you are in a bankruptcy court, if you are in a civil court. Anyway, I've seen several decisions mentioning this disregard of the legal entity, but the case was not disregard. It was a liability for something specific that happened. We didn't need to use that concept. And substantive consolidation, it's not exactly the same as disregard, and I've seen lots of confusion about that. But anyway, coming back to the point you made, yes, we now have very clear rules in our bankruptcy law saying that we can apply the substantive consolidations as far as certain requirements are met. And in general terms, we need to have the intermingle of the assets. We need to have reasons for these. It's not just because the debtor wants to have this company, the other one, and maybe an individual just to protect their patrimony, which happened in the past. And
Yeah.
also,
So maybe Gilberto, because not everybody may understand what substantive consolidation and procedural consolidation is. It really is, you have a group of companies, but you're trying to collapse the individual entities into one pool of assets and one pool of liabilities, right? If you substantially consolidate a number of companies in a procedure. If you only do it procedurally, then obviously, you use the procedure for all the companies. So there's one procedure, but there's still different entities with their own assets and liabilities. They're not yet pooled. That only happens when you do substantive consolidation. That's correct, right?
that's perfect. Exactly what happens, and that's exactly the difference. And the biggest fight, I would say, among creditors and debtors is that in many circumstances, debtors want to have the substantive consolidation because debtors will be able to vote a single plan, and for any reasons they might have, they believe that would help them to approve and get the approval of the necessary classes, and maybe end up with more free assets at the end. From the creditor's perspective, there's a dispute between those creditors that are in a more well-structured business. They are creditors from a company that is in much better shape than the other one. They don't want to have the substantive consolidation because they will lose at the end. And so this is the basic thing. And to handle this conflict, the law gives you lots of requirements and procedures that you need to follow, especially because after a reform we had a few years ago to clarify this. So this is what we are talking about.
In my experience, a lot of people are scared about the concept, right? Because the concept actually doesn't respect, the legal entity that is created. You basically, pierce the corporate veil when you substantially consolidate, and you do that when you have, scrambled eggs that you can't sort of, unscrambled. There's a group that is just, you don't know where exactly an asset or a liability sits. And in my experience, one huge case where this was a potential big issue was Lehman Brothers, right? I was involved in a part of that large global insolvency. And yeah, the threat was that in the US, they would try to substantially consolidate everything, which meant that certain creditors indeed would start to lose out. If, for example, certain creditors had a double dip, they had, a claim against a finance company and maybe a guarantee claim against the topco. And there was also an intercompany claim from the finance company to the topco. If you consolidate everything, then you will have less claims and probably less recovery. So it is something that, is sometimes used as a threat, but it is in very unusual situations, do you actually apply it? And my impression from the outside was that with the new rules that you had in Brazil, it was applied more often than it would have been applied in other jurisdictions. But you're saying that is actually maybe not the case. It's a lot of confusion that there is about the concept.
You are right to a certain extent, but the reform we had a few years ago came exactly, to put a guide to that, because it's the same thing. If we look, it's not a matter of just enacting a new bill, a new law. You need to, apply it. You need to test it. You need to change the culture. Let me go back a little bit to explain what I mean. When we first enacted our bankruptcy law and created the judicial recovery, and there is the concept that we need to preserve the company. We need to preserve the business. But we need to preserve those businesses that are viable, not all the businesses. And it took a while for the courts to really, absorb and apply these. At the beginning, that was more like we have to preserve the business. This is the most important principle in the new law. And because of that, we have seen lots of recovery plans that had no chance of being fulfilled at the end. Just because the first idea was that. But that changed over the years. Same thing here with substantive consolidations. We have arguments from both sides, but it's something to be applicable as in very specific circumstances. When you have, for instance, business of a group, they depend on each other. They cannot survive alone. They have all the business together. They sometimes pay assets from debts from the others. You cannot even, segregate who is paying for, and so it's very hard. For the process itself, it's a better thing to have the consolidation than not, because then you can have a clear view and give a fair treatment to all the creditors. that's the idea behind the consolidation. And but I totally agree. It's something that we cannot apply in all the cases, and we have seen several cases in Brazil where the courts rejected the substantive consolidation and sometimes accept the procedural because it makes sense to have the procedures together for a cost perspective, for instance, but there were no elements that would allow the assets, the liabilities to be treated together.
Yeah, again, it is also something that all the insolvency laws are based on a single entity debtor, right? While more and more with the development of group companies with various boxes, as you say, the way they operate almost as one entity, but they're made up of, multiple separate entities. And therefore, when the times are good, they're just treating it as one entity. But when the times are bad, we all of a sudden need to look at the individual parts and, use them as their own sole debtor and apply the rules to it. And sometimes, that is very awkward in a group situation where the various boxes are dependent upon each other and have actually, always traded as one group as opposed to, a single debtor. So I think a lot of jurisdictions are trying to figure out how do we deal with that, right?
It's the same thing we see in the cross-border arena, because the UNCITRAL model law, when they drafted it, I think they thought about one single entity, and what we
Yeah.
have are groups, and we have seen several cases here where there was a judicial recovery in Brazil with legal entities in other countries, and they were treated almost like a single entity, but the courts accept them to be part of the proceeding in Brazil under the argument that they were actually only financial instruments to get financing outside Brazil.
Yeah.
But you see, it's not even substantive consolidation because
It isn't. It's almost like dealing with, because substantive consolidation really deals with a situation where you can't make sense of the assets and liabilities anymore. But if you can make sense of the assets and liabilities, but it's a group and you're forced to actually treat it as a single debtor, box by box, that in itself could be something that also destroys value instead of, maintains value.
the,
But again, can you use the tool of substantive consolidation to deal with a group situation, or do you need a different tool for that?
substantive consolidation, the way I see, is there precisely to deal with the groups. And yes, at least in Brazil, you can use and has been used a lot. But uh, it's there's also another thing that we need to pay attention here when you say lots of companies in a group or several companies in a group, what's the best way? But look, if you think about a financial institution, for instance, when they enter into an agreement with a company, usually they take a look about the other business of the group. They are aware about the risks in most of the cases. But other than very qualified creditors, everybody that is trading, doing business with a company is looking at the company. They are not looking, imagine that a company in the south of Brazil could have some liability if they go into recovery because of a company that's in the northeast of Brazil. For the creditors, for many of the creditors, this will come up with, as a surprise. But and so those are the kinds of conflicts, those are the kinds of situations that we need to pay attention when we are dealing with these. And that makes the substantive consolidation very interesting because it's always you always have a case by case look to see whether it's one of those cases where you could apply and defend it.
Yeah. I want to go back to
But
something else
but
that you
but but
said.
just one
Sorry.
thing, in Brazil, there is a tendency, if the debtors, they have different companies, there is a tendency that they will try to get the substantive consolidation. In several cases, they will do it.
So you need to be aware of it. It's a tool
Yes.
that is there, and it
You
is
need
being
to be
used, but it
aware.
cannot be used for everything.
You need to be aware and analyze the case and fight it if necessary, because sometimes the request is not in the best interest of the reorganization. It's not the best interest of the creditors, but only in the best interest of the owners of the company. And so it's interesting. It's it's a very
Yeah.
nice topic.
I fully agree with it. I'm personally interested in that concept as well. Maybe taking one step back, one thing that I thought was very interesting that you mentioned, and something that I've seen develop over, I guess, the 30 odd years. Well, you're more than 30 odd years that you've been in practice, is that special sits is now an area of expertise that stands on its own feet. But I think in the past, and when I started, it was usually a bolt on to something else. And you did other stuff as well. You were saying, actually, I still do a lot of, I guess, M&A work combined with distressed work. So you see a company in good times and you see a company in bad times. What do you think is the benefit of actually seeing both? Because my experience very much is that M&A lawyers don't actually want to involve any special situation lawyers in their cases, even if there is the beginning of financial distress, because it sends the wrong message. Therefore, a lot of the times, denial of financial distress is a big problem that results in us not having an awful lot of tools to actually fix it. But if you're on both sides and they see you as an M&A lawyer, but you also have, the knowledge of financial distress, you can obviously, identify it early on and have more opportunities to deal with that. Is that sort of why you're in both camps?
Well, I will have several stories to tell you. But
Good.
this
Let's do
this
it.
aspect, it's not necessarily related to lawyers. But to managers, it's very common to see clients that come to you and for any circumstances. I work mostly for creditors than debtors, but sometimes they come to us as well. And I see it's not uncommon. In fact, I think in most of the cases, they come to the lawyer when they are really in a situation where you don't have even enough time to do many things. And I remember one of our clients came once to me and said, "Look, we are going to file for recovery. And we know you work with that. We have been working with you for more than a decade. We would like you to represent us." And that client said to me, 2 years ago, I was thinking about selling the company. And I had a conversation with an investor, and he said something to me that only now I understand. At that time, he said to me, "I think you should start thinking about judicial recovery." 2 years before our meeting. So that it many times the managers, they don't realize they need to think about other things. They don't realize because they don't even realize the mistakes they are making in the management. I dealing with a case right now in the business, agribusiness sector. And I made a question in one of the meetings, and I said, "Look, what are you going to do to change things?" And then the client came with lots of things that were in a business plan, which I had already read. And I said, "Look, let me rephrase it. I mean, what are you going to do differently from the way you have managed your business since then. Because if you don't understand what you have done wrong, you will not change. Because to achieve these results that you have in your business plan, you need to change. And that's the key issue. If you don't see that, it's not going to work. And we see that a lot. So another example I have, and that is directly related to this fact that being working in different fields. In one of the first reorganizations here in Brazil, I was in a huge meeting of creditors, and the debtor was presenting the plan. And then I asked what for me was a simple question, because that's what we have in M&A. And I said, look, okay, the plan is understood, but what are the covenants for us to check whether you are doing what you have said you will do? No litigator asked that question, because, right, it was the beginning of the new law. It was one of the first cases. But that is one thing that is there in all M&A contracts, in all financing agreements. So that view sometimes helps you. And it's not only M&A. I'm sure you had other circumstances in different fields where you have a meeting, you are discussing something, and you remember of something and ask a question about other problems that might happen. So
It's interesting because one of the things that later on in the career, when you develop a reputation for something, then that reputation helps you, but also may hurt you for other practice areas that you want to do. If you have a great reputation in financial distress, special situations, it may actually not help you getting engagements in M&A or in, um, uh, financing where things are, fine, growth and what have you. But if you look at your own, I guess, development as lawyer, I started out doing various things, and that was mandatory to do because, there wasn't only insolvency for me to do. So you build up, I guess, a foundation in the law that is a lot broader than just insolvency. And insolvency is one of the situations where, or one of the areas of expertise where you actually you need to have a little bit of knowledge of a lot of areas because it affects a lot of areas. But my question to you is, how do you deal with that reputation? Having a reputation of being a good special sits lawyer, doesn't it hurt you getting involved in other work? Because, you show up and it sends the wrong message. Because why is Gilberto there? He's there when things go wrong, isn't it? So is there a problem here?
I'm remembering of one meeting I had. I had a very interesting, complex case, a restructuring that it took us more than 2 years to finish. Syndicated loans, debentures, bridge loans, other debts, fight between minorities. And we were in one meeting with the board and the officers of the company, and at a moment someone asked us, what happened if we do that? And I said, well, if you do that, we are going to start talking about the thing that I love the most in law. And what is that? Insolvency. And that is still now, I when I meet some of the people that they remember of that meeting. Yes, I don't expect to be the guy that everybody knows that does M&A or insolvency. For you to be there, you need to be the one that only do that in our days, because our profession changed a lot. But you can be well respected in the fields you are, and people will know you, even if they don't see you in the first years in all those guides, for instance, because they know the work you do. They know how you work, and they know that you do the things right. I learned with my father, who learned with his father. When you do the right things, you will be recognized, and you get more work to do based on that. Of course, this is not something that resolves everything, but you have a point. Sometimes you're not perceived as the one that is, focused or entirely focused on that field, and so you might have other competitors that are better positioned to show themselves. And but I can't complain. I think that from another perspective, if you keep doing the same thing, and that's not applicable to bankruptcy, because I agree with you, to work in the bankruptcy field, you need to have a view of several different areas of the law. You need to have experience. You need to have at least a little bit of understanding about how business works. But I've seen some lawyers working in very specific fields, doing that their whole life. So it seems to me a little bit boring, honestly. And when you have this opportunity to work and be involved with other things as well, it's very interesting. And I think there's also something that comes with the age, I think, because you are there for many years, and so it's not uncommon for people to ask an opinion in things sometimes that you are not an expert in, and because they trust you. And
Trust is obviously, as a lawyer and in special sits, paramount. It is, and it's something that obviously you build up over many years, like a reputation. So yeah, that's definitely a lesson learned. It's something that you build up for many years. You need to be very careful, because you can lose it in an instant as well, right? It's sort of binary there. Um, you mentioned that things have changed a lot over the last, what is it, 30, 40 years. How have things changed for you when you started, if you look back, and sort of what they are now? I think we've touched upon a couple of things. One seems to be that the focus of insolvency was a lot more on liquidation, and now there are tools to do more rescue. Is that indeed how you saw the practice that you're doing develop?
yeah, well, let me go back a little bit. When I started working, uh, we used to type in typewriters. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have tablets. We didn't have AI. So the changes are dramatic. The core of our profession, though, is the same. It's the lawyer, it's the analysis, it's the contact with client, it's solving problems. But to do that, it's an entirely different work. And we see that, for instance, in the distressed market. 10 years ago, in Brazil at least, we didn't have a market for distressed assets, for NPLs. Now we have lots of funds. We do have a market, and we do have different kinds of transactions, and these transactions help the debtors to turn around, because we have different tools for them to negotiate, to restructure the business and everything. And so it was a dramatic change. We didn't have electronic files. Now everything, or almost everything, is electronic. And this is not only in terms of courts, but also in terms of the Board of Trade and other services. So it's a constant change, I would say. You need to get to speed. You need to keep your interest in understanding what's new, in learning. Oh, never stop learning, never stop studying. This is one of the key things. When I look back in terms of perspectives of career, well, I'm changing a little bit the subject, but one thing brings other things to my mind.
Absolutely.
When I think about career, there are several things that I really believe they are key. Never stop study. Never lose your interest in things. Do your best to have best people beside you. If you can have people that are much better than you, always do the right thing. Doesn't matter what. Do the right thing. And well, Peter, uh,
How do you know what the right thing is? Is that, how you've been brought up, what you have studied, what you have experienced, the people that have influenced you when you sort of developed yourself? Because that is, yeah, it's key. I fully agree.
when I think about, when I say do the right thing, I'm referring to principles, to the way you act in life, to ethics, to moral, to transparency, to give to your client all the information he needs, all the options, and try to understand the client, try to understand his needs or her needs, and be honest. In this
Yeah.
sense, I mean, because sometimes I've seen lots of cases where uh, when you look to the past, you don't understand why the company was put into bankruptcy. Why? Maybe because that's what the attorneys knew how to do, but it was not a case. Um, and so it's this. I mean, I remember once in the same case I mentioned of a client that came to us saying that he was going to file for judicial recovery. We told him, look, we work for several creditors. We work for financial institutions. We work for tradings and other companies. I can assist you, but there are certain things I will not do because they are not correct. As far as you understand this, no, you're aware. Okay. And I remember I was in a meeting in one bank when we were leaving, waiting for the elevators, and the people that were in the meeting were returning. We listened to them saying, "What a difference." That was a compliment because we went there. We didn't. We were transparent. We showed the facts. We discussed it based on real things, on real perspectives. And in another case, I was representing an investor that had tried twice to buy the company, and then we realized that company was in financial stress. And then I called the client. Look, they are in financial stress. They might go into judicial recovery. It might be a time for you to reopen conversations. And then they did that. And in fact, they ended up buying the company to a split. They bought the main line of production. It was a simple pre-pack from the way I see the case. And to be done very fast. But the other side was they wanted to get the most they could from the other creditors. So they prepared a plan. They want to negotiate. They started to negotiate and everything. And then they presented a cash flow to defend the business plan. And I looked at that. It was not on me to question, but I called the financial advisor and look, I'm looking at your business plan here. I look at the history of the company, the the the, the results, and as of a sudden, there's a jump here from like I don't remember. It was a long time ago, like from 5 to 15, 20% earnings. And I said, what do you think is going to happen for such a big change? Gilberto, I don't think of anything, but we need to give the numbers. So it was not consistent. This is the kind of thing I will not do. Either we
Yeah.
do it right or not. But anyway,
So, Gilberto, do you have like a life philosophy that you apply to your profession? Something that, you over time have developed for yourself with your own experiences that you believe is also the guide for how you conduct yourself in your profession?
uh, well, I've said some of them. There's another thing that my kids, they laugh because they listen to that during their whole life, and many friends here at the firm as well. There's an expression in Portuguese that says, treino difícil, combate fácil, which means, practice hard and the combat tends to be more easy. I mean, prepare yourself. Prepare yourself. Because and that applies to everything, not only professional. Prepare yourself to what you're going to do, because then it tends to be easier. There are surprises always, but that's the funny part of it. That's where you have fun. But prepare yourself. I remember one of my first cases. At the time, we had the hearings, and after the hearings in a civil procedure, we had to present final arguments, and we could that orally or through a memorial to be presented later on. And the judge asked me and the other lawyer, would you like to present orally or by a written memorial? And I said, by a written memorial. And the other guy, older than me, no, let's do it now, orally. Okay, so he presented the arguments, but I had prepared myself. And I did it point by point, and then at the end, the judge said, it might have been better to present written memorials. But what happened? I lost the case. I did everything I could. I did my best, but I lost the case. And that comes to another lesson I learned. It's not only your truth. It's your truth. It's the other part truth. And it's the understanding of the judge. Who knows? You need to understand this. And I heard this from a professor as well. You need to be prepared for that. Sometimes, or I heard people say, life's not fair. Right. I lost that case because there was a lot of social aspects and things. If I look at the law, I had a wonderful argument, but the judge that is there trying to decide, he's also looking to what is going to be the effects of these in the other cases and jurisprudence and blah blah blah. So this is another thing. So we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And
I think that your Portuguese saying, there's sort of an equivalent to that in, I guess in English. It's sort of called the 5 Ps. Preparation prevents piss poor performance. That's exactly what
that's
you're saying.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I've learned many things with my clients as well. I remember once one of my clients came with a problem, and he was a creditor. He had a very significant credit in Concordata at the time. And he said to me, look, I have several friends that they say when they are in a situation like the one I am right now, that, well, I lost money with that guy. I will not do any business with him anymore. I don't think this way. I usually think, well, I lost money with that guy. Now let's meet and talk about how I can make money. It's a different way. Because what was he saying? It's done. These are the facts. So let's look at them. Let's see what we can do the best, and let's do it. The
It
first
reminds me.
gain is the one you feel, the less.
Yeah, I think it has also a lot to do with how you deal and how you think about failure, right? Because mentality in distressed, financial distress and special situation is that if you hit financial distress, it's almost like a failure. But in life, as you said, a lot of things are not fair. They happen for various reasons, and you can only win, in my experience, if you actually experienced a lot of losses as well, because those lessons that you learn from not achieving the goal that you've set yourself, but learning something along the way, sets you up in a much better way to have another go at it and ultimately succeed. And that is, again, life lessons that you learn, but also in practice. And it is related to a mentality you have about failure. And I believe that, that is the essence for a lot of people still having such a negative view about financial distress, because they're sort of taking it too personally and not facing the facts and learning from it.
It's interesting because listening to you, I remember that when I started working, I wanted to work for the debtors, being a sort of Robin Hood, fighting against the powerful financial institutions because they were oppressed by the interest charges and everything. But for any reasons, I ended up working more for the financial institutions and the creditors than the debtors. But that taught me a lot. We have good and bad things in both sides. We have those debtors that are very nice people, but they are not good managers. We have, on the other hand, the bad guys who might be very good managers, but they don't manage the business for the business. They manage the business for themselves and don't care about everything. And the same thing from the creditor side. I mean, in the past, I used to say, wow, but that's a huge interest to be charged. But if you look from an investor perspective, if you are an individual with some savings and you can get 10% interest in a very safe investments, why are you making a risk investment for the same 10%? When you start understanding the mechanics of the market, most of that, prejudice you have goes away. And and that is precisely what gives you a broader view about the things. You can understand, you can better understand. You can come to your client and say, look, you have a very good point, but think about these circumstances. These circumstances, I mean, are the difficulties they will face on the other side. You can bring examples, you can bring your experience. And many times this is an interesting thing to approach the parties to get a deal.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So, am I right in assuming that in Brazil, financial distress still has a negative stigma attached to it? Or do you say, actually, that was probably the case 30 years ago, but it has changed?
No, I would say that it was much more 30 years ago, but it is still there. And we are improving a lot. We are improving a lot. In more than that, creditors and debtors, they are realizing that it's better to treat the problem with transparency and try to build up a solution than to. I think that bad view about the idea of failure of bankruptcy has something to do with the culture, but it also has to do with the law that we had, because if we go into bankruptcy, if you went into bankruptcy in our old law, you spend probably your whole life being liable for your debts. So what
There's
is the
no discharge.
incentive? What's the
Yeah.
incentive? There were certain terms for extinction, but they're very high. And those were reduced. And this is a huge incentive for the people really, no, I'm gonna go and file for self-bankruptcy because I see there will be an end there. At the same time, the enforcement instruments and tools, they have improved, so that also creates an incentive for people don't sit and wait. They need to try to build a solution somehow. But answering your question, yes, we still have this sentiment, but much less than in the past.
And what was culturally the sort of reason for looking at this in such a negative way?
I think it's the sense that guy failure. It's a prejudice. It's not the same culture we see in other countries that understand that failure is part of the success. If you are if you are afraid of not having success, you will not try. And we need people to try. That's how we grow, right? I don't mean that you can do anything and don't be liable for what you do. No, but we need to look seriously about the problems, deal with that, and give the entrepreneurs the means for them to continue making new business. This is how the country will grow. And so it's more or less this, I think, is it's on us. It's
Yeah.
changed.
And do you think that the fact that instead of only having banks, you maybe also have distressed investors, a market for distressed investments, so that there's an exit for those stakeholders that are in a distressed situation involuntarily? They can actually sell their position to professionals who voluntarily want to go into a distressed situation. Does that help change the business culture and
A
make
lot.
it less sort of negative to actually address financial distress, because there are options to do that, I guess, in a less harmful way than just sitting on it, not telling anybody, and then at the very, very last moment, when there's nothing to be done, there's a liquidation and everybody loses out and everybody has a bad taste in their mouth from the experience. But if you can do it earlier with professionals involved, hopefully that will help change mentality more, broadly.
No, I think this market is key for the whole thing, because as you said, we have much more alternatives. We have much more tools. We have much more players. We see a competition among investors in this field, and sometimes you can get a better deal with one or the other. We see investors specialized in certain kinds of deals with distressed assets. We see others with pre-bankruptcy financing agreements. They're much better on that. And we see those that are searching for entirely new things to take the risk. So this is definitely that was a huge change in Brazil. Let's say from 10 years from now.
And how did it change? What was the catalyst for the change?
I think the first thing was the law. The second thing was that in terms of deep financing, for instance, there was a lot of uncertainties, not necessarily on the terms of the law, but on the effects of a certain decision. For instance, the law used to say that if you do a financing during the reorganization, the judicial recovery, you will be protected if the company goes into bankruptcy. You're gonna have a super priority. But what if there is an appeal and the appellate court reverses that decision? What's the treatment?
You're exposed.
So I have already landed my money. And there was this small change in the law to say that if you do a financing after a court authorized you to do, it doesn't matter if there is a change. The deal you have made will be protected. So this is fundamental because that gives you certainty, and we see more. Deep financing based on that simple thing. But more than that, there was a business that was developed based on distressed assets. We have a very strong regulation in terms of the bank sector in Brazil. Lots of rules about, recognizing losses in the balance sheets if there is a delay of more than X days, if the company is in bankruptcy, in judicial reorganization. And I think people saw business here because that was good for the financial institutions and also for the funds to invest in those funds. They could clear their balance sheets. The investors could buy a whole group of claims against different companies, and that was little by little, growing. There was also the growing market in claims. People that saw, well, there's a risk here, but that's a chance to have a much better return if I finance this debtor to maybe negotiate a way out of this crisis. Then I can profit from the upside if we have there. So the regulations, in other words, the certainty of the rules, made those investors more comfortable to make more and more investments. And we see these not only in the insolvency fields, but also in terms of claims, civil claims against the government. There is a huge market now in Brazil in terms of buying such kinds of claims to receive a payment from the federal government in a few years, or even financing litigation. Now we are seeing more and more. So I think this is the evolution.
So are you saying that the court system in Brazil is also reliable and predictable in that respect? And if we then look at maybe insolvency restructuring, what about the judges? Do you have specialized bankruptcy judges that sort of facilitate the process? Because sometimes that is also, a bottleneck in jurisdictions where you may have the tools in the law, you may have the professionals that can apply them, but the judicial system is clogged up, and the judges have to deal with so many different areas. They're not specialized in an area like insolvency, and therefore, the tools are not as effective as they need to be. Is that an issue in Brazil or not?
More and more we have specialized courts. And not in all states, not in all the places, but more and more. In those states where we have most of the cases, you have specialized courts. In terms of this specific field, you see a great evolution, a great understanding about how the system works. And yes, of course, sometimes you see a decision that, wow, this is totally different from what we have seen. But in general terms, they are very reliable. You know what you can expect. What doesn't mean that you cannot have a surprise. Yes, there is a rule in our law that says certain kinds of guarantees they are entitled to be out of the reorganization. What's not a good thing, but it's there. And they, if they have, for instance, a fiduciary ownership in a certain asset, they can get possession of the asset, sell, and get paid. However, during the stay period, they are not allowed to do that. But that's a
It's a
rule that,
moratorium. Yeah.
right?
Again, they're stopped.
Yeah, if the asset is essential for the reorganization, let's say it's the plant, you have a guarantee on the plant. So if you take the plant, you kill the business. But that is a rule that apply to capital assets. Those assets that are there for you to production, it doesn't apply for money. It doesn't apply for crops. It doesn't apply for inventory. It's the key assets. And we have seen lots of decisions saying that in a certain circumstance, accepting the argument of someone saying, look, and the bank has a guarantee over my receivables. If I don't get the receivables, well, it's the end of my business. Or in the business, in the agribusiness sector, they have a guarantee on the crops. If I don't have the crops that I need to sell, make money, it's the end of my business. And although now the Superior Court has reinforced it, this is a rule that only applies to capital assets, we still see some decisions deciding in the opposite way. So that creates, so these kind of things, yes, we have sometimes, but in general terms, no, more and more we know what, when there is new things, you can see a different understanding from the court in Rio Grande do Sul than the court in Sao Paulo has, but this is part of the game, right?
Yeah. So there are professional bankruptcy judges specialized in it. Is the legal system in Brazil is more civil law based as opposed to common law based, right?
Yes, civil law based. And although our law is pretty much inspired by the US law with lots of differences, but yes, Brazil has a civil law is a civil law country.
So in insolvency, the rules are, inspired by the US. Does that also, because in the US, the judge has a huge role to play. If you then compare it, for example, to the UK, the judge has a role to play, but obviously you have an IP that can be an insolvency practitioner that is appointed officer of the court and deals with, restructuring. So it's a different system from the US. US, a lot more court-based, where the judge ultimately decides. Is that how the Brazilian system works as well, where
No,
there's a
I would
big
say
role for
that
the judge?
it's not exactly the same. It's more a civil tradition. I mean, to give you an example, if I'm not mistaken, in the US, the court can even change priorities if the circumstances require, right? under certain circumstances, I think they can do that. Do you know, Peter?
I'm not sort of clear on those details, but I think they
I
have
I think
extensive
they have
power.
a certain power to make some adjustments. In our court, they can do that. There is of course power left to the court. The court has to uh, approve the plan after. Well, we use the term homologation, but the court's not allowed to review the plan and say, look, I don't think this is viable, for instance. The court, when review the approval, the court will look at the illegalities, if the procedure was observed, and these kind of things. So it's more restricted compared to the US.
Yeah. And are the judgments of the courts sort of brief judgments? Because if I, for example, look at continental Europe, judgments in the Netherlands are very brief. But in the UK, you could have a judgment of several hundreds of pages. Obviously, because the guidance giving in the judgments is very important for the common law system. Is it more civil law judgments in Brazil that are brief and not extensive?
Depends on the matter.
Mm.
We usually have more synthetic decisions, smaller decisions, but in some cases we might have, dozens of pages of a single decision, and sometimes several pages of. If you look at a court, at a superior court, depending on the case, you might have long decisions discussing the origin of the institute, discussing the reasons. If you go to the Constitutional Court, for instance, decisions are much bigger. But in terms of bankruptcy, usually they are not that long. But when there is a complex situation, when the court feels the need to justify the decision, when the court needs to review different and several arguments presented by the courts, that might take a bigger decision and with more pages. But if not, that tends to be shorter.
Okay. So at the outset, you were explaining that Brazil is actually almost made up of various countries into one country, right? Because all the districts, have their own, I guess, peculiarities. What about bankruptcy? Are there certain cities or certain regions that are primary for bankruptcy in Brazil? And is Porto Alegre one of those, or is it more like Rio or Sao Paulo or Brasilia? Other places.
No, I don't see here something as in the US where you see courts more. I would not put this way more favorable to debtor or to creditors. Of course, you can look at certain chambers, you can look to certain courts from time to time, and you may recognize that the way they decide tend to be more favorable to the way they look the process. But it's not the same thing, I believe. What we
There's
have
no
though.
forum shopping there.
No, not at all, because there
No.
is a rule saying in the law you need to file in the place where you have the main establishment. And so you cannot simply file in another place because you want or because it's there where
But you
you.
can't change it because obviously the
No,
big
there
thing
is a
in
discussion though about what main establishment might mean, but it still is connected to the most relevant business, the place where the decisions are taken, the turnover and everything. So
it's
it,
the Comey concept, basically,
it's
the
close
center
to.
of main interest.
Yes, exactly. But I was saying that what we do have is that in certain states you have much more business than the others. Then over the years, the courts of those states, because they were involved in many more cases, they have many more precedents, and so they got some importance based on the history. But other than that, no, you cannot choose just because I want to file there because that judge is more reliable looking for a data perspective. No.
So I want to maybe go to so the development of your practice. Maybe you started off focusing more on regional things for the IRS, the Treasury, where you worked, for, and cases related to that. They became maybe at a certain point in time more national, but you also, have developed your career cross-border, international. And one of the things that you also do is you work with the World Bank to assist other jurisdictions in the development of their insolvency laws. And I know that you've actually been involved in two countries in Africa, Mozambique and Angola, with the development of their insolvency laws. What's your experience there? How does that compare to, the laws that you've seen in your own country and how they operate? And then all of a sudden dealing with policy decisions in those, other countries in another continent with maybe another culture.
Well, then those were fantastic experiences because you realize that you are doing more than just business. You are helping them, and they are very nice people. They really wanted to, you know, to get the knowledge, to do the right thing, to improve their institutions. And what I did in Angola and Mozambique was a little bit different between the countries because in
They both
Mozambique,
speak Portuguese, right?
both
So
speak
Portuguese, yeah,
Portuguese, and that's the
exactly.
reason why I was hired by the World Bank. And both have laws very similar to the Brazilian law, with a bit of influence, one more than the other, from the Portuguese legislation. So that was also another reason. In Mozambique, I did training. They already had the law, and we went there to train IP professionals, for courses for judges, and and basically that. In Mozambique, I was hired by the World Bank to share international principles. We never write the law. We just discuss, we clarify doubts, we present alternatives, and we share practices we have seen in other jurisdictions, and we share the World Bank principles. And it's always on the country to decide which is better for the country. And so in Angola, we did that. And also after these, we did some trainings, and I was very happy to go there also other times for conferences. And it's very good. It's very good because it's very gratifying because you are helping them. You are trying to do your best to help them, and you see the development of the things. Besides the fact that you know other culture, you meet other people, as we
So
see
what
the
were the
whole.
differences in culture then that you sort of that had an effect on how insolvency was perceived or how people worked with distress situations based on differences in culture between Brazil and the two jurisdictions that you were involved in?
Well, yes, there are differences, but there are lots of similarities as well. Both were colonized by Portuguese. Both countries speak Portuguese. There is lots of exchange between the countries, not only in terms of commercial thing, but in culture, in films, and we know news, especially then, I realize they pay a lot of attention on Brazil. Maybe they see a little bit Brazil as a country that went through the same history and was able to develop more. Uh, and so this is there as well. But I learned in these projects that think about the differences first, and then you think about the similarities. This is something that I learned. You need to respect, you need to try to understand the way they look things. But in fact, they didn't have a well-organized insolvency system, and that was what they are looking for. So they did trainings, they studied what happened here in Portugal and other countries, trying to have tools for entrepreneurs to, you know, reorganize the business. And they understood that is something necessary for the country also to deal with the development, to create incentives for the development. And each one has its own problems. Angola was a socialist country for many years, so it's a huge task to change the mindset. And they are working hard for that. And we see every time you go there, you see new things. You see construction. However, both faces their own difficulties. Uh, with fights, riots, and things. So
Yeah,
it's
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 like politically still
it's
unstable. Yeah.
it's very interesting, Peter. It's a very nice experience. Very, very nice.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar experience last year, in particular in another African country, Rwanda, where it's eye-opening to see how the policy decisions, and what actually is the mentality, the fear, the focus of the jurisdiction, obviously based on the own experience in their own country with insolvency. And I think one of the things that I believe still is a very big factor of worldwide the stigma around insolvency and financial distress is that the media is very much focused only on portraying the fraudsters, the big frauds, and that is what people associate with financial distress, fraudsters. And there are fraudsters, and we know that, but it's not all fraudsters, right? There
I
are
heard,
lots of other reasons.
if you don't mind, I heard once from a judge, a bankruptcy judge, a comment about this. Exactly, he was talking exactly about this. When people think about bankruptcy, people think about fraud. From my experience, fraud might be the fifth or the sixth cause of bankruptcy. You have many things before that. And
Absolutely.
the most relevant maybe is the lack of management.
Yeah.
And
No,
then
no,
you
exactly.
have
But
and
again,
then you have changes in the market. For instance, as of a sudden you have a pandemic. What is the fraud
yeah,
here? There's no fraud. If I have a
yeah,
hotel that was closed for more than a year, what's the fraud? Right? And
yeah. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that, and that is why I guess there's also a fear of people that deal with financial distress that they will be branded a fraudster, right? And that's why they're not going to talk about it.
there 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 are some things. I lost what I was going to tell you right now, but we learn a lot over the years about that. I was going to tell you something, but I forgot. I will remember in a second.
Don't worry about it.
But let me
Maybe,
go, if
yeah,
you don't mind. You started mentioning, you started in Porto Alegre. How and how did you end up in a cross border situation?
exactly, yeah,
Uh, I was thinking about that the other day. People usually say, what were the key turns in your life? I think that we are made of lots of things, lots of decision, lots of thoughts, lots of things that you have learned from your teachers, from your father, from your colleagues, from your clients. That makes you. But one of the things that I remember that was very important was studying abroad. It's interesting because my father always had this, although he hadn't studied abroad. He was born in the countryside like me, and he told me that his father sent him to study in Porto Alegre in a school for two reasons. Because they used to teach English and they do sports. That's what my grandpa said to him. And he said to me, well, I don't do sport and I don't know how to speak English. But he had that, and I always heard that. And then I ended up going to the NYU. And I was in the first meeting we had there. It was a presentation, and a guy in front of me turned to me and said, hi, pleased to meet you. I'm Peter from the Netherlands. And then the other one said, my name is X. I'm from this country, from that country. And then on that right moment, I realized I'm exactly where I wanted to be. That's the place. And from there, as I told you earlier, I changed office. I went to work in a big firm. Then I was
So yeah, maybe we can hone in on that a little bit, because we sort of, we touched upon it, but we didn't really go into it. When the rules regarding the IRS and representing them changed, and you did your master's and came back also from New York, you then decided to go to a larger firm, but you stayed there for a while, up to the point that you decided, with some others, to actually start your own firm, which again, that's quite a story in
Yes,
itself.
I was turning 50. I remember talking to a friend of mine that was 53, and he was thinking about retirement. And I listened to him and said, wow, am I doing the right thing? Because I'm doing the opposite. I'm starting a new business. But that was a wonderful thing that happened in my life, because we were able to set up a firm based on the principles we believe. And that there was one thing: when we were organizing the firm, we hired someone to help us with the branding. And then the Grow had interviews with each one of the partners. We were 8 at the time. And after she finished, she said, it's amazing. I talked to all of you separately. It's amazing how you have the same ideas, the same concepts, the same desires. And that means what makes a firm or an institution survive the founding partners. And we believe that is, it has to be a place where you can laugh. You need to have
I
fun.
agree with that. Yeah.
10 years, sometimes more in a day. You have to be, feel comfortable, enjoy it. We need to have transparency. We need to do the right things. We need to, the most we can, have better people than ourselves. And that were the ideas behind Souto Correa, which was a success, I think. And I'm very glad for that. Very, very glad.
And that has also, was that a springboard for yourself to further expand your practice in cross-border insolvency? Had that, that change facilitated, the practice that you have right now?
Oh, I don't think it necessarily facilitated, because I was working in a big firm before that. but to a certain extent, there was a change because we were able to do the way we thought we should. And from this perspective, I mean, I was already exposed to cross-border things in the other firm, but not in the way or how we understood we could. And since the beginning, we kept this international DNA, going to congresses, participating in, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about everybody in the firm, actively participating in institutions and dealing with international arbitration and keeping contacts with firms, clients. It takes an effort because you have to, travel a lot. But at the same time, brings you a lot in personal perspective, but also in terms of the firm, because it's, opens the door.
So you started with 8 partners in Porto Alegre, and now you're over 200
We
lawyers,
we
and you're
we started we started with 25 lawyers. Now
yeah.
we are over 220, I think.
Wow. So is that the way things go? Because I think in in London and New York sort of centers, but you see globally that there's a trend of law firms to sort of either become huge multi national big law firms, or they go smaller boutique, and there's very little in the middle. How is that in Brazil? Because you've started with 25, but you're now 230, one of the larger ones.
When
Where is this going?
Yeah, when we opened the firm, we didn't have the goal of being one of the biggest. We wanted to be known as first year service providers. I mean, continue to provide very good services. That's was the goal. But I think at least in Brazil, we still have lots of everything: big firms, boutiques, and middle firms. I'm not that certain whether some of those mid firms will survive for so long. It's not that we will not have mid firms, yes, but if you don't change your mind, I heard a consultant in a different field saying me a while ago that my clients that survived in this field were those that were able to think about the future. They knew where they wanted to be 30 years from now, for instance. And I see some of those firms that it's like they stopped on time. It's let's say 20 lawyers law firm, but with that concept, that mindset of an owner. It's me, everything around me. What if I die?
Exactly. So
And
succession is the big thing, right?
this
You need to.
kind of mindset doesn't give to the associates space and the tools for them to grow up. And if they are very good, they will lead the firm.
Yeah. No. So I think if I look at the UK and the US, and continental Europe, I think the expansion of the very large firms is basically they're gobbling up in all kinds of jurisdictions other firms, local firms, right, to extend their global reach. Do you think that that is the future for Brazil as well? That these large firms will just, gobble up firms like yourself
It
over
is a
time and be
possibility,
part
but
of.
it is a possibility, but they would need to We would need to have a change in our law because there are certain requirements that need to be met. For you to work, to have a law firm, you need to have only lawyers graduated and able to practice Brazilian law, unless you have a firm or a service provider that provides service as an international consultant. So it's not so easy. There's a discussion here. It's not worth going to it, but whether we should change or not this legislation. But yes, there is a tendency in this, but I still believe there will be room mostly for very specialized firms. And for us to get there, it will take a long time. Maybe not that much in the US, UK, but in Brazil, Africa, and other places, it will take longer. And that's
Yeah.
that's that's what I think.
So we've touched upon a number of these things already, but maybe try to bring them together in one question. If you would sort of have to say to somebody, well, mastering your trade or your craft in special sits, what would that be for you as a lawyer? And is that different from, another insolvency professional like, an accountant, or are they interchangeable? What are sort of the key characteristics for, I guess, a successful career in special sits, based on your experience?
Wow, this is very hard to answer, Peter, because I don't think there is a receipt here. There are things that we see. And I've seen very good professionals that were very successful, and their paths were totally different. Some of them started as judges, other started as lawyers since they were in university and worked as trainees. I was in the public service as well. I think it's little by little, grab the chances you have, take the opportunities. This is for sure. If something appears, start working, learn with the people, study, and start to participate in institutions. You need to be known. The people need to remember of you. So, but it's very hard. I don't know. I don't have a receipt.
There's no like one thing that
No,
I think
no, I don't
one of
think
the
so.
things that
I've
I've
seen lawyers that were, working in not even in law firms, but in accounting firms or in financial institutions. They turn to be wonderful insolvency professionals.
so you think that actually your start with sort of the public service for the IRS was a great foundation that ultimately helped you in private practice as well.
It's not only this; it's the whole thing. It's like building a house, little by little. It's all the experiences you have. I'm sure I miss other capabilities that someone else might have, but those are the one I got during my life, during my experience, my work. So if I would say something, I would say take the most you can, keep these experiences, learn, and then
So
it's
maybe turn the question around, and instead of identifying what are the characteristics to be successful, what do you think are traits that will are dangerous traits, or negative traits to have in order to be successful in special sits?
I would say something that's not does not apply only to special seats. I mean, I strongly believe that we need to balance things. I heard once that when you are ready to retire, you need to look back and have something to rest from. I mean, realize that you have worked and now you will rest. But you cannot look back and ask yourself, what else have I done other than work? So this is a trade that I don't think is worth in any fields, special seats, M&A, whatever. You need to build your career in a way that you can have a balance between work and personal life, work and family, because this will make a huge difference later on. And so this is a trade-off. I will never. I haven't done in the past because I had the chance to move to go to Sao Paulo, and I decided not to go, and I would not go because I'm not saying that you could not change, you could not go and work in other countries even. What I'm saying is that you need to look how it fit in your own life. It's not only job. You can't just think about job. No, look everything. And if an offer comes in a circumstance that you have nothing that prevents you to go, take the opportunity. It's there. And what else could I say?
Can I maybe ask you something? Because I think that is very profound, and it is very important, but it's also very tricky in the special sit space, in particular, because everything is always urgent, and it is all encompassing. It's very difficult to do it 9 to 5 and sort of regulate it, and you need to like what you're doing. And you may do things with the right intentions, but as you were saying yourself, others may see it completely differently, right? So how do you balance that?
You cannot, you are not required to make 2-5. Of course, you are going to have weekends where you're going to work Saturday and Sunday up late night. Of course, things are urgent, and they are urgent not only, I can assure you, in bankruptcy. Although in bankruptcy, if you are working for a dealer, for instance, there is a moment when you are like a doctor in an intensive care unit. You need to do everything, otherwise the business is going to close.
Yeah.
But the point is, do you have to do that every single weekend? Or at a certain point, you are so used to work hard and you simply forget and you believe, no, that's what I have to do. No. If you realize that you are doing this every single weekend, working every single weekend, something is wrong. If you are not there to be with your son or daughter in his or her birthday, something's not going well.
Yeah, but it's hard to sometimes see that once you're in the, as they call it, the hamster wheel or the rat race, and you're sort of running, and you think you're doing things for the right reason.
We like it. We like what we do. We do a lot of work, and more we benefit to the sense that we enjoy that. But we need to pay attention to that. We need to pay attention. It's not then later on in your life, you are rich, you have work it, you might, have a bad relationship with your kids. You might have, other problems. Who knows? But more than that, it's for you. It's not even for them. It's for you. I remember there was, I had a colleague at the public service. He was older than me, and we were talking about the kids. I think I had my first at the time. He was very young. And he said something to me that was unexpected. And I was, to a certain extent, shocked. He said to me, I never changed the diapers of my kids. And I said, I stayed like that and immediately made a comment, which was not good, maybe, but it was what I was feeling. I said, you don't know what you miss it.
Mm,
That's the kind
mm.
of thing. It's,
Yeah. So how have you been able, to actually find the balance and navigate through things?
well,
Because,
let,
you've
let me
done a
put
lot.
this from a different perspective. My wife said several times that I work too much.
I've heard that
I
before.
don't realize, so, but that's the way I think I've done.
Yeah. So I mean, you need to somehow see the signs, and even if you're forewarned, because everybody is forewarned if you go into law and maybe in our practice, but other practices as well. You're going to work very hard and do it for long periods of time. But it comes with a price tag if you're not careful.
Yeah, my point is, let me come back to one example I gave. How come that you are not there in your birthdays, in the birthdays of your kids? It might happen. Might happen. And you don't need to feel guilty about that. The point, though, is if you are not there because you are doing something just because you are, and you didn't stop to, could I have organized my schedule to be there? Do I really need to be there? Do I need to be here at the office doing this right now? Or can I go there? There's a difference. If something unexpected happened or a huge opportunity that, look, it might change our life, they are going to understand. But I see sometimes people that don't even think about that, and that's a mistake. The way I see it might be good for them.
Yep. So it's priorities. That actually reminds me about
Peter,
another
we
question. Yeah.
always, in any change in life, we gain something and we lose something. And the lose not in the bad sense. I mean, it's an option. We leave something
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah. You
And
may
and
miss a
since we
couple of big
understand
cases.
this,
Yep. Yep. Understood. I think one of the things that ties into that is your attitude towards the opinion of others, right? How much are you doing things because you believe that you need to do it because of the opinion of others, or are you actually able to make decisions on your own, or are you pleasing others? And there is a mentality, I guess, very easily in our profession where, everybody, there's a peer pressure for you to just put work first. And if everybody around you does that, then you're the odd one out if you have a different perspective on it. So there's this peer pressure around you that you need to be able to withstand.
yeah, that's a problem. Uh, but we have different cultures, right? And I don't mean different cultures among countries. I mean different cultures among offices in the same country. There are those offices where the only thing that counts is the number of hours you have built in 1 month. And there are others where they look other things. They consider what other works you do. Of course, at the end, as we have a business, we need to generate profits. So you cannot just sit there and don't do anything. But I see more and more, even in big firms, uh, this kind of understanding. I think that this was one of the key reasons why we grew up very fast, because we strongly believe that we can have a well-established firm doing very good and providing quality services of a high quality, and doing that in an environmental that it's not that a, I missed the word for that, but it's more friendly.
Yeah. It's
In,
not like, cutthroat or sort of, yeah,
yes,
very,
yes, but this is a culture that you need to, you need to have, and you need to, you know, transmit that for the younger uh, lawyers, employees. It's something that you need to practice. If you
lead by
think
example. So you need to show them that you can go. And if you work all hours
right,
of the day, they
right,
will just look at you and say, well, you preach it, but you're not practicing it.
yes, that's true. But it's very hard for us to see our mistakes. It's better, it's easier for us to see the mistakes that the others are making.
That's right.
But I believe I give an idea about what I mean if I look at my life, because I have time to be with my family. My kids, I mentioned, they decided to study law. I think that they might have seen me as someone that was there and not someone that was just working. Otherwise, probably they would have chosen another career. Uh, I have time to do sports. I have time to enjoy life. I work a lot. Yes, I do, but I love to work. So,
Yeah. No, that's
and
great.
I will
So,
do that until I like it, until I'm interested in learning and until I have the energy.
so how much has your profession then sort of, made up your life, influenced your life, and what is there outside of the profession that you sort of really enjoy? You've already said family, obviously. That is that. But are there other things that you can sort of, do alongside the profession, or actually do you gain so much joy out of the profession that there's not much else that you need?
Well, one of the things, well, not first thing, I I had a wonderful career from my perspective, so I was able to give to my family a very good life and the means to go to my kids to go to good schools to study and and I have invested a lot on this. Second, the profession gave me this opportunity of having contact with so many different cultures, thoughts, way of being. And this is fantastic, fantastic. And and the profession gave me something that is, in every day. It's a place to be working with someone that I like, helping people. And in being a lawyer, it's interesting because the diversity of problems, things, way of being, one client is totally different from the other. The questions they may sometimes might be similar, but the background behind that question is different. And this is, gives you energy. It gives you. I mean, I think I'm saying that it's very important that you work with something that you like. I cannot think about working for 30 years with something that you don't like.
Yeah. So do lawyers in general have a good reputation in Brazil, or
There
are
is
they
a
necessary
lot of
evil?
a lot of jokes about lawyers. That answers your question.
Okay.
One of them
So
is you need to be a friend of lawyer before he goes to the law school.
that's right. Well, yeah, there's something to be said for that. So we've sort of looked back, we've sort of looked to the present. What about the future? If we look into the crystal ball and we look for the next 10, 20 years, and
Uh,
also we sort of consider the present generation, which is different from us, but neither better or worse, but different. how do you see things going forward?
This is the 1 million question, right?
That's
Or
why
even
I'm
1
asking
billion.
it.
Because I think that the first thing that comes to my mind is something that we see in all congresses we go is what's going to be the impact of AI. And we are already seeing an impact of AI, not only in our profession, but in others as well. Many of the work that, or much of the work that used to be done by junior associates now, you do, they do with AI tools, meaning that we don't have as many people as we used to do. And that is a concern I have. We need to train those young lawyers. How are they going to start and continue their career? So I think this is the most relevant issue now. And I have listened to people that say, no, there will be no problem. It's not an end for the profession, but definitely is affecting in terms of budgeting, in terms of fees, in terms of work. How do you do the work? And many clients, they are looking at prices more and more, so you need to use the tools, but the tools brings other questions regarding privacy. How do you deal with that? Up to which extent you can use those tools? There are some ethical problems as well. And at the end, I believe that certain issues are going to be there no matter what, to be resolved by the attorneys. Because when you see a tool like that, you also start to see questions that were not there in the past. I gave you an example. What are the limits for the use of this? Are there privacy issues? Can I use those informations or not? What are the ethical aspects of this? How do we deal? Who is responsible for? And so at the end, in our field, I can't imagine a situation where it would not be necessary to, under certain circumstances, to resolve certain problems, to have a face-to-face meeting, to be there on the table to discuss and talk. Uh, so,
Just to make sure that you're talking to, not a bot, but a real human being with all the fakes that you can have online. I may be talking, I think I'm talking to Gilberto, but he's actually sort of a fake creation of Gilberto who can talk like Gilberto, look like Gilberto, and,
but it's not
we don't even know.
correct. And just to share you another experience, in the year after pandemic, I started my first M&A transaction 100% through virtual, which was unthinkable before the pandemic. At the end of the transaction, I said to my client, look, when this pandemic finishes, I'm going to go to visit you because I want to, meet you in person.
Yeah. I've had the similar experience where, I've also not met clients. We do it all virtual,
Yeah.
which is, that is, that's remarkable. And AI, so it is the training of juniors that is a big issue. And well, it's a tool, AI, but we're still dealing with humans, right? Because could you imagine, an AI as a judge?
Where some people talk about that. Could you imagine AI as a doctor? I heard that if you look to the future, there will be a moment when the AI will be able to give better answers about a disease than the doctor, because the AI will have information not about you, but about you, your parents, your grandparents, your community. So to a certain extent, I don't see. It's hard for me, but we have seen movies about that many, many years ago,
Well,
right?
yeah, some very scary ones as well. But
Very scary.
they're not humans, right? So this is what it is. You know, the law as we know it is really catered for biological creatures, right? If you're dealing with something that is not a biological creature, a lot of the laws, you know, have no relevance because all the incentives are completely different if you're not
This is
biologically
a
human.
discussion for maybe not 2, but 4 hours.
I know, I know. I'm not trying to
Because
resolve it.
we start to see some devices they are using and to for some diseases, also devices to help you to do lots of things. What
Yeah,
the future is, I don't know.
no. Well, presently we see that there's a lot of turmoil, I guess, globally in geopolitics, right? And geopolitics is more and more having a direct influence on business, including our business, right? And there seems to be, at least if you look at geopolitics, a retreat away from globalization and more focused on your own territory, your own sovereignty. In our space, we've always been, you know, the opposite, right? We're trying to get closer to universalism and stay away as much as possible from territorialism, right? And we're modified universalism at the
Right.
moment, whatever that may be. What do you think? Do you think that we're going to also in our space see a retreat back to territorialism and less so to, you know, uh, um, universalism? Is there going to be like a substantive insolvency law harmonized that we can use? Or actually, do you think, no, you know, jurisdictions are going to compete and they want to have their own laws applied. Therefore, there's an incentive to be territorialism.
Well, jurisdictions compete, right? The Americans try to argue that if I hire a law firm and pay a retainer, I have enough contact with the jurisdictions to file there. I know this is a very exceptional case, but it's a good example to show that jurisdictions are always competing. I don't see, we do have this political thing, which I don't think is a good thing because the world is looking it, at the whole world. We grew up a lot. We had lots of stability and increase in commerce. This is a good thing. But we are seeing a reverse movement in different places. I don't see this though in terms of uh, our field. I mean, the UNSTRA model law is there and is being adopted more and more by many clients. And even if we have this territorial thing, it's hard to believe that someone will believe that other than in one is very specific case, it's better than have a uniform law that helps communication, that helps dealing with different proceedings and everything. But it's a risk. It's a risk. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening in a short period of time.
Well, I hope you're right, and I guess, you know, being part of international organizations like INSOL International is hopefully a way for us to keep talking about these things and
Right.
keeping, you know, everything at you know, doing things that actually ultimately is good for cross-border situations, because a lot of the, you know, problems are just not local, they're international. So we need to deal with these things, and going back to only your own jurisdiction is probably going to be value destructive instead of, you know, maintaining value. But it's tricky. I think we've covered a lot, and I'm very grateful for you, you know, to sort of share all your views. Maybe sort of trying to land the plane, the last question I have is, if anybody younger person is considering starting a career in special situations as a lawyer, as a practitioner, getting involved, what would your advice to them be at this stage?
Well, the same thing I have already said. First, prepare yourself, study, try to work with people that is in the field to learn the most you can. Doesn't matter whether it's a lawyer or an IP professional. Of course, if your goal is to work in a law firm, go try it, try to get it. But as I didn't actually plan that in my life, I've seen so many people that were working in with special seats and turned to work in other fields, and the opposite way as well. So if you are thinking about something, go and do it. Study, try to join a firm, try to work with a professional that works in the field. But that's not a guarantee, because it's not uncommon to see people that are in a certain field and realize, this is very interesting, and end up working in different things. Uh, I've seen it recently. Someone that was working with M&As and started to work with wealth planning, and he's changing. So
So be open-minded and, try to
open-minded.
do as
The
much
key issues,
possible
I think,
as
for
you
our
like.
profession is open-minded, study, never keep studying, never stop studying. Uh, when you mention open mind, look to things, not open mind for opportunities, but look what's happening, and don't try to, uh, how can I say that in Portuguese? I would say, in life não se pula etapas, meaning that in life you go one step ahead. I've seen many young lawyers looking on at older practitioners with that feeling that I want to get there faster. They forget it took them 20, 30 years to be there. What I
Yeah,
mean is
yeah,
that you need to have the background. You need to study. If you go and jump to another place, in a while you realize that you miss something to be there. And at the end, it's not gonna be good.
yeah. It takes time. You need to put in the reps, and it's incremental gains. A little bit every day will
Right.
actually accumulate. It's exactly the conversation I have with my two sons. That is indeed something I've also, a lesson learned for the career so far is exactly that. Is that a shortcut? There are very few shortcuts that you can take. And sometimes another lesson learned is, if it's too good to be true, it usually is, right? So if there is some sort of magic shortcut, that somebody believes you can get from A to B, immediately without putting in the work, there's something not right, because that usually in life is not the case.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
sometimes in our profession, people I want people are thinking about making money. It's the wrong mindset. You need to like the job. You need to do
yeah,
it well, and then you make money.
yeah.
But
You earn money, right, by doing
yeah,
something that you
earn
like and
money.
actually has
Exactly.
value,
Perfect.
as opposed to making money
Right.
for
Perfect.
something that nobody needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Gilberto, I am really, really pleased that you took the time today, and you were not feeling too well, but we
My
had
pleasure.
a good conversation. And yeah, thanks very much for your time.
My great pleasure, Peter. It's always very nice to talk to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.